All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, talking the start of the baseball season. Join me today, the national baseball reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Jared Diamond, is here. Jared, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good, and it's nice to talk to you on the podcast. Jared actually helped me out a while back. I did a thesis documentary on the home run ball, and he did a lot of interesting stuff for a researcher book called Swing Kings, and I recommend to read that. A lot of fun if you want to learn about the history of the launch angle, stuff like that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, check it out. The book, the book's already 2 years old, but I think
Yeah.
it still holds up. I hope so. Things in baseball change so quickly, but I think it still holds up 2 years later.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I'm still learning stuff from that book to this day, but I want to talk about the current season here. And obviously, we're coming off a bit of a strange spring training here with the lockout delaying everything. We had the whole free agent frenzy, but now that pretty much all the big names are signed here, like there could be any sort of lingering impact from the lockout into this season in terms of like whether it's pitchers not stretching out, injuries, anything you could think of.
It's going to be very interesting to see. People in the industry are convinced we're going to see a surge in injuries, that pitchers are not going to be built up. We do know there's going to be expanded rosters for the first month, or actually 2 months of the season. We're going to have two players, then one extra player on the roster. And the reason people believe all of this is that they're pointing to 2020, where there was clearly a increase in injuries after the second spring training, the summer camp that happened. I will say, though, this is a little bit different than that. And it's why I'm not necessarily sure that looking at 2020 is a sign of what's going to happen this year. If you remember 2020, spring training shut down about halfway through, or even a little bit later than halfway through. Pitchers were pretty built up at that point. Everything suddenly shuts down. There's a long break. No one has any idea when things are going to start again. And then they were on a drop of a hat asked to ramp back up very, very quickly for opening day. The difference this time is that no one got hot to begin with, because spring training never started and no one really knew when it was going to start. So really, I don't know if it's necessarily an apples to apples comparison, but that said, I know from talking to people in baseball, they believe there's going to be injuries, and we'll see. It's one of those things that you'll never really know what the effect is, right? There might be more injuries, there might not. I guess we'll see when the season gets going.
Yeah, I feel like if based on what I've seen in terms of like the pitch counts the pitchers are working off here, I mean, apart from maybe Max Scherzer, it feels like no pitch will be ready to go like more like 5 innings to start the season.
Yeah, that's probably true, but is that really different than what we've seen in the past few years? I mean, remember last season, 2021 was, I think, didn't get talked about a lot, but we kind of crossed an important threshold, which is the average start in Major League Baseball dipped under 5 innings for the first time last year. It was just under 5 innings. It was 4.9 something or whatever it was. But we've already started to see the length that started pitchers go drop and drop and drop and drop. And there's no reason to think it won't drop even more this year. The lockout's a reason for that, but honestly, it probably would have dropped even further whether the lockout happened or not.
Yeah, that's true. And now we have sort of the offseason picture set up here. Who are your big winners from the offseason here? Who did the most to improve themselves over the winter, whether it was before the lockout or after?
Well, you have to talk about the Mets, of course, first and foremost. They had an absolutely fantastic winner, not just with Max Scherzer. Everyone's going to talk about Max Scherzer, understandably so, but Starling Marte, Mark Canha, Eduardo Escobar, some of the other guys they signed to improve their lineup should obviously really help them. The Mets are going to be a very, very, very interesting team one way or the other this season. Toronto, of course, is going to get a lot of attention. What's so interesting to me about Toronto is that the Blue Jays lost people. They lost the Cy Young winner in Robbie Ray. They lost an infielder in Marcus Semien, who had an absolutely extraordinary season. But instead of that crippling them, which it easily could have, and for maybe other teams it would have, they just went out and replaced those guys, which I think is quite admirable, right? So you lose Robbie Ray, you go sign Kevin Gossman, and you sign Yusei Kikuchi. You lose Marcus Semien. Yeah, you're not going to be able to replace that, but you go out and trade for Matt Chapman, and that puts the Blue Jays in a position where a lot of people believe that they might be the best team in what is a very, very competitive AL East. And I also would say something similar about Atlanta, the way they handled their first base situation. There's a lot of disappointment. They didn't go out and sign Freddie Freeman to the long-term contract, but you know, emotions aside, you could argue that maybe they're in a better long-term position with the long-term deal for Matt Olson they would have been with Freddie Freeman. So those are a few teams that come to mind. Also, Philadelphia, you have to really like the move they make. That's a very, very scary lineup when you're talking about Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Nicholas Castellanos, Rhys Hoskins, JT Realmuto. That's another team that really interests me.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fun there. I want to go start in the local angle here in New York based. I want to start with the Mets here. You mentioned obviously they have a huge offseason. They bring in a lot of guys. They change a lot of culture out because last year's team is probably one of the most disappointing in the league. So what do you think about the Mets here? Like, what do you think their chances are to like make a play for the NL East? Obviously, the Braves are still a little bit ahead of them, in my opinion, but I do think that they're in a good position.
I think purely on paper, just looking at the names, I think the Mets are the best team in the NL East. But the reason I put that qualification of purely on paper, it's because a big reason why I feel that way is because they have Jacob Degrom and Max Scherzer in their rotation. And we don't really know what's going to happen with those two guys. I mean, Jacob Degrom missed really most of last year, half of last season, not more. I don't even remember exactly when he last pitched. June, July, whatever it was. It's been a while since we've seen Jacob Degrom on the mound. Max Scherzer, he's Max Scherzer. He had a great year last year. But let's not forget that down the stretch in the postseason, he struggled. He talked about having the dead arm or whatever it is that he was. Max Scherzer is 37 years old. He's going to turn 38. And I'm not sure that he necessarily realizes that he's 37 years old turning 38. So look, if Jacob Degrom and Max Scherzer, or Jacob Degrom and Max Scherzer, I think they're the best team in the NL East. If they're not, that changes everything. And the reality is we just don't know what they're going to be. Like the Braves just won the World Series last year. I'm not taking anything away from them. They are a great team. But let's not forget that the Braves, they only won 88 games last year. They were not good for much of the season. I know they didn't have Ronald Acuna for a good chunk of it. They made a lot of deals that sort of elevated them at the end of the season. But it's not like the Braves in 2021, despite winning the World Series, were this runaway contender. They won 88 games. They had an incredible sort of stretch run after the trade deadline. So I personally think the Mets might be slightly better. It doesn't mean I'll be right. I think the Braves are really good. I think the Phillies have a chance to be good too. It's a very competitive division. Really, everyone besides Washington got better. Even Miami, it's sort of a joke because they're the Marlins and it's very easy to dismiss the Marlins. The Marlins have a really, really nice young pitching staff, especially if Sixto Sanchez comes back to join Sandy Alcantara and Pablo Lopez and Trevor Rogers. So I think the NL East is very, very competitive. I am tentatively picking the Mets, but I really think them and the Braves and, maybe even the Phillies could be duking it out all year long.
Yeah, I know one thing some Met fans complain to me about is they feel like that the lineup changes, yes, that they are a little bit like a different look here, that they feel to me there's like one big bat short. Do you see that as a potential issue for them they may have to look at later in the year?
Yeah, it's a valid point. I don't think we should underestimate how good the guys they signed are though, or acquired are though. Starling Marte was great last year, right? He had 310 batting average. He led the major leagues with 47 stolen bases, the OPS 841. The guy was really, really good. Eduardo Escobar as well. Not a sexy name. I'm not going to sit here and say that he is, but in 2019, he had 35 homers and 118 RBIs. Last year, he had 28 homers and 90 RBIs. That is serious power. Are they one bat short? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, what is Pete Alonso going to do? I do think a lot is riding on Francisco Lindor, right? Francisco Lindor needs to be the Cleveland Francisco Lindor, not the New York Francisco Lindor from last year. If he is the Francisco Lindor that the Mets signed, gave all that money to, there's your big bat in the middle of the lineup. If he is that guy, that helps a lot. I actually thought that the Mets were a starting pitcher short, and then they go out and trade it for Chris Bassett, and suddenly you're like, man, DeGrom, Scherzer, Bassett, Carrasco, Walker, that's pretty good. I do agree with you that the lineup, there's some questions in it. And I think a lot of eyes are going to be on Lindor. A lot of eyes are going to be on Pete Alonso as well. But again, just the names in the lineup, if they do what you sort of think they could do, I think there's enough there. And we also know that the Mets are not going to hesitate with Steve Cohen to go out and acquire somebody if needed at the trade deadline. I guarantee to you, they will be busy at the trade deadline if they think they're a piece away.
Yeah, it makes some sense. And I want to stick in the A's for 1 second here, because obviously you talk about the Braves. They won the World Series. They replaced Freeman with Matt Olson in the long-term contract here. They bring Duvall back. It's talk Acuna might be back in May. And a lot of the same guys are back. They did lose a couple of the fringe pieces there, but like, and what do you think the Braves' chances are of making another deep October run?
I mean, they just won the World Series, so you have to respect them, especially Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to come back. And, you know, there's a valid argument to be made that he is the best player in baseball right now, right? I mean, it's been Mike Trout for so long. Eventually, it won't be Mike Trout. And Ronald Acuna Jr. is as good of a candidate to supplant Mike Trout in that role as anybody. So it's a really good team. There's no question about it. The starting rotation is really good still. You still have Max Fried, you still have Ian Anderson, you still have Charlie Morton. That bullpen, we saw what they did in the postseason last year, right? Tyler Matzik was a revelation. Now they have Kenley Jansen to go along with all the other guys that they already had in that bullpen. They're the great team. And if you told me right now that you think they're the favorite in the NL East and they're better than the Mets, yeah, sure. Like I would never argue that point. I think they're a really good team. The projections generally prefer the Braves to the Mets. The projections are still very high on the Braves. It's hard to argue with that. I really look forward to seeing the Mets and Braves duke it out. Now, we kind of forget that that was a great rivalry for a long time in the late 90s into the 2000s. The Mets and Braves were like a really legitimate rivalry. You know, they met in the postseason a few times. It was really fun. So I'm looking forward to maybe getting back to that.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun to see too. I shift gears across town to the Yankees here, and they certainly had an interesting offseason, whereas they come off a disappointing year where 2020 doesn't go the way they planned. 2021, they're struggling most of the way, get in late, get beat up in the wild card game. There's talk, oh, you need to either change the manager, make big change the roster. They bring the manager back, they tweak the roster, they don't do a ton, but like, what's your sense of what you think the Yankees did to change themselves up this winter?
The Yankees are absolutely baffling, and I don't understand what they're doing. And look, they're the Yankees, and every time you think the Yankees are not going to be good, you're wrong, right? Like I've been wrong about the Yankees seemingly every year, where they have teams where you look up and down the roster and you're like, this is not a good baseball team, and they win 100 games. So I'm not going to sit here and say that the Yankees are not going to be good. That said, like my gut and heart tells me they're the fourth best team in the AL East, which like it's insane to say that. And like I say that with the knowledge that I'm probably going to be incredibly wrong because that's what the Yankees do. But it's sort of baffling, right? Like why didn't they sign Carlos Correa to the contract that the Twins signed him for? Why didn't they go get Freddie Freeman or someone else to play first base? Like why didn't they improve their starting rotation? Like I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do anything this winter. And yeah, okay, they traded for Josh Donaldson. Okay, is that supposed to be inspiring to anybody? Josh Donaldson is not a young guy. He's 36 years old. The Twins were desperate to get out of the Josh Donaldson contract. Why do we think that this is going to be the answer that's going to fix the Yankees? And by the way, more important, their starting rotation after Garrett Cole is the same. It's Jordan Montgomery, it's Nestor Cortez, it's Jameson Taillon, it's Luis Severino. No one knows what any of these guys are going to do. It's just baffling to me. It doesn't mean the Yankees aren't going to be good because, like you said, they were really good last year and they have roughly the same team. They bring back Anthony Rizzo. You're still going to have Joey Gallo. You know, you hope that Gleyber Torres is better than he has been. He's not playing shortstop anymore. Your defense at shortstop is greatly improved, you think, with Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Like there's things about the Yankees that you like, but then you like look around the division and you're like, Toronto got like clearly better. Like they made moves to clearly get better after winning 90 games last year. Boston, after making the ALCS last year, went out and clearly got better by signing Trevor Story, who's one of the biggest free agents on the market. And then Tampa Bay is Tampa Bay. Like you underestimate Tampa Bay at your own peril. Like, the Rays are pretty much the same team they were last year, but the Rays were significantly better than the Yankees last year. And the Rays might have the best overall pitching from top of the rotation to last guy of the bullpen in all of Major League Baseball. That's just what the Rays do. So it's like, I just don't get why it was clear that the Yankees had opportunities to improve their team and didn't do it because they have Anthony Volpe in the minor leagues. Like, everything I hear about Anthony Volpe is that he's going to be great. There are scouts that I've talked to that talk about Anthony Volpe like he's the second coming of Derek Jeter. And that's great. I hope that is the case. But it's not going to be in 2022. So I just don't understand why the Yankees had the offseason they had.
Yeah, it's also wild to think about the fact the Yankees basically gave the Twins the salary they need to sign Carlos Correa when they're just signing him alone would have probably made the Yankees much better.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. To me, there's no excuse why the Yankees didn't just sign Carlos Correa. You don't want to give him a long-term deal, fine. And I don't really know why. They probably should have just given him a long-term deal. But look at the deal that Carlos Correa ultimately got. You're saying the Yankees couldn't have beaten that deal? I mean, or given him that deal? Of course they could have. And it is confusing. And look, it's tired to go on this rant about how Hal Steinbrenner is not George Steinbrenner. And the reason I think it's tired is because George Steinbrenner gets looked at a lot more favorably than probably he deserves, right? Like the way when the Yankees actually got good during George Steinbrenner's ownership was when George Steinbrenner started sitting things out and not being George Steinbrenner and letting other people make decisions. So I'm not going to sit here and extol George Steinbrenner. I think there's a lot of revisionist history about him. But the one thing that you can't say about George Steinbrenner is he didn't really want to win, and he didn't want to try to put the best team on the field every single year. And I think there's valid questions about Hal Steinbrenner and what his goals are. There's a lot of Yankee fans out there that believe that Hal Steinbrenner is satisfied with putting out a team that's going to be good, going to be competitive every year, that might make the playoffs, should make the playoffs, might win a title, but is not willing to go that extra mile to put them over the hump. And I think that's what we saw this offseason. We're like, the Yankees are going to be good. Like, they're definitely going to be good. They're not going to be a bad team. Like, they're going to be competitive for the postseason. They very easily can make the postseason. And once you're there, you have a chance to win a World Series. That said, they clearly have holes, and they didn't really address any of that. And I think that is why there's Yankee fans that are disappointed right now.
Yeah, I think the way it makes us, I've heard people describe that they're marginally better, which, yes, maybe Josh Donaldson's attitude helps in the clubhouse. This group got too complacent last year, a little too loosey-goosey and not really caring about the results on the field as much. But look at the American League East, where you said you have this juggernaut here. And I think if you're not getting a second at the base, it'd be very hard even with the extra postseason teams, because the Central and the West are not as strong, and teams there could just pile up wins against weaker foes.
Right. You're not going to get 4 AL East teams in the postseason. It just won't happen. Right? They play each other too much. Maybe you'll get 3. I think there's a very good chance, in fact, that you get 3 AL East teams in the postseason, but you're probably not getting 4. So why put that to chance, right? Last year in the AL East, the Rays were the best team, right? They had 100 wins. The Red Sox and Yankees were far behind them with 92, and Toronto had 91. I mean, the Red Sox, Yankees, and Blue Jays were basically equally good last year. And you could argue that the Blue Jays and Red Sox did things to get better, and the Yankees did not. That doesn't mean that the Yankees will end up being better than them when the season happens. Maybe Luis Severino's great. Maybe Josh Donaldson's great. Maybe Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton each play 145, 50 games for the first time ever, and both hit 45 home runs. And the Yankees are amazing. Like, there's a path for that to happen. But there's more question marks to me with the Yankees than there are with those other clubs.
Yeah, if you had to pick today, who would you pick as your AL East champion?
I feel like everyone wants to say Toronto, and I'm not going to say they're wrong, but I'd probably still pick the Rays, because the Rays are the Rays, right? Like, the Rays are this, like, they made some sort of like weird deal with the devil or something where no one ever cares about them, but they have like the greatest baseball team ever every single year. And by the way, the reason I like the Rays is their pitching. Like, the Rays pitching is just so good. And I know like the names in the rotation don't like jump out at you, but like I said before, from like 1 to 13 pitcher pound for pound, there's no team in the AL East that's better. You have a full season of Wander Franco, you have Austin Meadows, you hope he bounces back. Like the Rays just have this way about them. So I think they're still probably the best team in the AL East, but Toronto sort of right there beneath them, and the Yankees and Red Sox are beneath them. That's how I sort of see it right now.
Yeah, that makes some sense. And I know every year since we have this one team sort of comes out of nowhere, has a big run. Last year was the Giants, who most people thought were like a average team. They want to win 107 games and end up hosting the Giant Dodgers in the division series, end up losing that series. But is there a team you have your eye on that you think could do better than people think they will right now?
Very good question. There's like a few that sort of like, these are all sort of like pie in the sky things, but like there's a couple teams that come to mind that's like, if things break right, they could be good. One of them is Seattle. That's not really that hot of a take. They won 90 games last year. I don't really know how they did it, but they did win 90 games. I think they got better this offseason. And considering that, Houston, Houston is not quite as good as they were last year. And Anaheim is still Anaheim. Like, if you told me that Seattle is going to win the AL West, I'd kind of buy that. Like, I think it's not necessarily, could be a long shot, but I kind of like them. I think Detroit is interesting in sort of a weak AL East or AL Central, excuse me. Like, Detroit has a lot of really good young guys, and you kind of look at them as like, eventually the Tigers are probably going to be good. When's it going to be? Probably not 2022, but like, could it be? Yeah, it could be. And the other one, again, this is all very pie in the sky stuff. But the other one, like, if things break right, I mentioned them before, is Miami. Like, the NL East is very, very competitive, but Miami might have the best overall starting rotation in the NL East. Despite that, even with Scherzer and Degrom on the Mets, like 1 through 5, especially if Sixto Sanchez gets back at some point. Like, I'm not sure the Marlins have enough offense to put them over the hump, but that's another team where you're like, if you squint the right way and things break the right way, they could be kind of interesting. So I'm not saying I'd bet money on the Marlins or the Tigers or the Mariners, but like, you asked teams that you don't expect that could be good, those are 3.
Yeah, those ones you keep your eye on for sure. And the other way, real quick, is there a team out there you think that might not do as well as we were prognosticating heading into the season?
Interesting question again. I don't really know exactly what people are prognosticating with this one, but Houston, I think, is one where, like, I think you could sort of start seeing the end of the Astros a little bit, right? Like, I'm not saying it's going to be this year, but the Astros, you sort of just pencil them in. I was like, they're going to go deep in October every single year. And that's been the case every year since 2017. I think you're sort of maybe starting to see like the end of that reign, maybe. Like, George Springer's gone, and now Carlos Correa is gone. And like, yeah, Justin Verlander's back, but he's 39 years old. And the rest of the rotation has a lot of question marks with Framber Valdez, Luis Garcia. Like, the lineup should still be really good, you think. But like, Yuli Gurriel's going to be 38, and like Michael Brantley's going to be 35, and Jose Altuve is, he may have his best years behind him. And like, I'm not saying they won't win the AL West. They probably will at the end of the day, but it's like, I kind of sit here and think like, maybe we're seeing sort of like the end of the Astros being the Astros, right? Like, maybe it's not in 22, but maybe it is, especially with like the Mariners kind of behind them, and the Angels. Like, we make fun of them. They still do have Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani and Anthony Rendon, and they added Noah Syndergaard. Like, maybe they'll, that's one that I sort of look at as like, are they on the way down? Maybe. I could sort of see it.
I think the one I have like raised my eyebrows a little bit is the Phillies. Is yes, they do have tremendous hitting, and their lineup can score like 10 runs a game if they want, but defense will be an adventure for them, and the bullpen's still an adventure for them, and the pitching beyond Wheeler and Nola is, I think, a little questionable. So for me, I think the Phillies be the one I sort of like look at like a little side eye if I don't know like how good
Yeah.
they will be.
Yeah. The Phillies, I don't know if the Phillies are going to be that good, but I don't really, I guess what I thought about the Phillies with your question, the reason I didn't name them is because I'm not really sure that people have that high expectations for them. Do they? Maybe some more than last year. That was an 82 win team last year. And I don't really see the Phillies as better than third best man, at least at best. So like maybe they'll be even worse. I don't see them as like this surefire. I don't know. I don't think the Phillies are that great. I think they're going to be fun to watch though. Their lineup's going to score an incredible amount of runs, right? Like they're going to score a ton, but their defense is going to be terrible. And I agree with you. Their pitching is like a big mess, especially because Aaron Nola was not Aaron Nola last year, right? Like if Aaron Nola is Aaron Nola, okay, like that's decent one too, but like he wasn't very good last year. So then you have Zach Wheeler and who the heck knows. And they did do some things to address the bullpen, right? You bring in Brad Hand, you bring in Yuri Familia. I think the bullpen is better than it was last year, but that was the team that had the most blown saves in the majors in 2021. I don't think it got that much better.
Yeah. All right. My last question here is obviously, I know we're still in spring training right now. We're wrapping things up here, but if you had to make a pick today, who would be your World Series pick, like for the matchup?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and it could change between now and now and opening day. I don't think this is going to air before opening day. So if I tweet something different, forgive me. But as I sit here right now, my World Series pick, the matchup, is the Dodgers. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cliche, but like they're insanely good. They're like ridiculously good. It's scary how good they are. I like them coming out of the National League. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Blue Jays. I know I just said they aren't the best team in the AL East, and I still I do believe that, but I don't know, something about them that just appeals to me. And I think of Dodgers Blue Jays World Series would be really, really, really fun. So I'm going to pick it for that reason. Dodgers Blue Jays in the World Series. I want to be flying back and forth from LA to Toronto in October. I think America and Canada would love to see it. I think it would be a really fun series. So let's make it happen.
That would definitely be a lot of fun, Jared. Thanks a lot of time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I'll give you a follow social media and keep up with your coverage for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, I'm just at Jared Diamond on Twitter, just JaredDiamond. I post all my stories there. It's gonna be a fun year. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm so glad that there's going to be a full season. The lockout was just horrible, and I just like genuinely cannot wait for opening day. So let's get going.
Absolutely, Jared. Thanks all the time. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Thanks a lot.